Adventure Chapter 1 The Crimson Tears. The rain lashed against the windows of the train carriage as it rattled through the English countryside, a fitting prelude to the peculiar summons that had drawn Hercule Poirot from his London flat. The little Belgian detective, impeccably dressed despite the dreary weather, adjusted his moustache with a gloved finger, his sharp grey eyes scanning the letter in his hand. It was penned in an elegant, if slightly tremulous, hand by Lady Eleanor Ashbourne of Ravenwood Manor. The words were urgent, almost imploring. A portrait in her ancestral home, that of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, had begun to weep blood. A phenomenon, she claimed, that defied reason and demanded investigation. Poirot folded the letter and tucked it into his coat pocket, his mind already turning over the possibilities. A bleeding portrait? Mon Dieu! It was the sort of theatrical nonsense that often cloaked a more mundane truth. Yet, Lady Eleanor's reputation as a sensible woman suggested there was more to this than mere superstition. As the train slowed, Poirot gathered his umbrella and stepped onto the platform of the small rain-soaked village of Ashbourne Hollow. A carriage awaited, driven by a dour man in a dripping overcoat. "Mr. Poirot? I'm Harrow, butler at Ravenwood," he said, his voice clipped. Poirot noted the man's tense posture and the way his eyes darted toward the looming silhouette of the manor on the hill. The journey was silent save for the creak of wheels and the patter of rain, but Poirot's mind was far from idle. He observed the landscape, gnarled trees, mist-shrouded fields, and the manor itself, a Gothic edifice of grey stone that seemed to brood under the storm clouds. Upon arrival, Poirot was ushered into the grand hall of Ravenwood Manor, where Lady Eleanor awaited. She was a woman of late middle age, her silver hair pinned neatly, her face etched with worry but retaining an air of aristocratic dignity. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a hand, "I am most grateful you've come. This matter is beyond my understanding." "Madam, I assure you, no matter is beyond the understanding of Hercule Poirot," he replied with a slight bow. "Tell me, if you please, of this portrait." Lady Eleanor led him through a maze of corridors, adorned with faded tapestries and stern-faced portraits. The air grew colder as they approached a heavy oak door. "The gallery," she murmured, unlocking it with a key from her pocket. Inside, the room was dimly lit by flickering gas lamps, its walls lined with paintings of Ashbourne ancestors. At the far end hung the portrait of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, a stern figure in 17th century garb, his dark eyes seeming to follow Poirot's every step. And there, beneath those painted eyes, were streaks of crimson, glistening wetly as if freshly spilled. Poirot approached, his expression unreadable. He tilted his head, studying the canvas. The streaks began at the eyes, trailing down the cheeks like tears, pooling at the bottom of the frame. "C'est curieux," he murmured, producing a magnifying glass from his pocket. The substance was thick, slightly viscous, and unmistakably red. Yet Poirot's nose detected no metallic scent of blood, only a faint, unplaceable chemical tang. "When did this begin, madame?" he asked, turning to Lady Eleanor. 3 days ago," she replied, her voice trembling. "Mr. Harrow noticed it first. I thought it a cruel jest, but it has happened again each night since." Poirot nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. The gallery was locked, she had said, accessible only by herself and the butler. Yet the phenomenon suggested interference. He made a mental note to inspect the lock later. "And who resides in this manor?" he inquired. Lady Eleanor introduced the household. Her son, Charles Ashbourne, a man in his 30s with a penchant for city life, Her niece, Beatrice Langley, a quiet young woman with an interest in family history, and Mr. Harrow, the butler, whose family had served the Ashbournes for generations. As she spoke, the door creaked open, and Charles entered, his handsome face marred by a scowl. "Mother, this is absurd," he said, barely acknowledging Poirot. "Paying a detective to chase ghost stories. We should be selling this crumbling pile, not indulging its myths." "Charles, please," Lady Eleanor said sharply. "Monsieur Poirot is here to help." Poirot smiled faintly, noting Charles' impatience and the way his fingers drummed against his thigh. "Monsieur Ashbourne, perhaps you have seen this phenomenon yourself." Charles snorted. "A trick of the light, or some servant's prank. I've no time for it." He strode out, leaving an awkward silence. Beatrice entered next, her delicate frame swathed in a dark shawl. Her eyes flicked to the portrait, and Poirot caught a flicker of unease, or was it fascination, in her expression. "It's unsettling, isn't it?" she said softly. "The stories say Sir Reginald was a cruel man. Perhaps his spirit—" "Mademoiselle, spirits do not paint with crimson," Poirot interrupted gently. "But rest assured, I shall uncover the truth." Mr. Harrow lingered by the door, his face pale. "It's unnatural, sir," he muttered. "I've served here 30 years, and nothing like this has ever happened." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. The butler's nervousness was palpable, but was it fear of the supernatural, or something more earthly? "Merci, Mr. Harrow. I shall wish to speak with you later." As Lady Eleanor led him to his quarters, Poirot's mind was already at work. The portrait's tears were no miracle, of that he was certain. A chemical solution, perhaps, or a cleverly designed mechanism within the frame. But why to frighten Lady Eleanor? To preserve the manor's mystique, as Beatrice seemed to wish? Or to distract from some other scheme, as Charles's impatience suggested? In his room, Poirot sat by a crackling fire, his notebook open. He sketched a rough plan of the gallery. Noting the portrait's position relative to the windows and lamps, he listed the household members, their demeanours, their potential motives. Lady Eleanor's fear seemed genuine, but fear could be manipulated. Charles's disdain for the manor hinted at financial motives, perhaps a desire to sell, thwarted by his mother's attachment. Beatrice's fascination with the portrait suggested either naivety or cunning. And Mr. Harrow, his nervousness warranted closer scrutiny. The rain continued to drum against the windows as Poirot closed his notebook. The mystery of the bleeding portrait was but a thread in a larger tapestry, one woven of human greed, fear, or ambition. He would unravel it, as he always did, with the little grey cells of his mind. "Eh bien," he murmured, "the game begins." Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The morning sun struggled through the heavy clouds, casting a pale light over Ravenwood Manor. Hercule Poirot, having risen early, stood at his window, observing the mist that clung to the estate's sprawling grounds. The manor, with its ivy-clad towers and weathered stone, seemed to hold secrets in every shadow. Poirot adjusted his tie, his mind already turning over the puzzle of the bleeding portrait. A chemical trick, he suspected, but the motive remained elusive. To unravel it, he needed to understand the Ashbourne family and the legacy that bound them to this eerie phenomenon. After a breakfast of toast and tea, served with commendable precision by Mr. Harrow, though the butler's hands trembled slightly, Poirot requested a meeting with the manor's librarian, Miss Clara Dunham. Lady Eleanor had mentioned her as the keeper of the family's records, a woman whose quiet demeanour belied a deep knowledge of Ravenwood's history. Poirot found her in the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and smelling of aged paper and wax. Miss Clara, a slight woman with spectacles perched on her nose, looked up from a ledger as he entered. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Lady Eleanor said you wished to learn about Sir Reginald." "Précisément, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, settling into a chair opposite her. "This portrait that weeps blood, it is of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, n'est-ce pas? I must know who he was and what tales surround him." Miss Clara hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her ledger. "He was a formidable man. A noble in the 17th century, known for his wealth and ruthlessness. The family prospered under him, but at a cost. There are stories, whispers really, of a dark pact. They say he traded his soul for power, and the portrait," she faltered, glancing toward the window as if expecting to see Sir Reginald's stern face peering in. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest, though his expression remained impassive. "A pact, you say? And this portrait, it is tied to such tales?" She nodded, opening a heavy tome bound in cracked leather. "This chronicle, written by a monk in 1683, mentions the portrait. It was painted shortly before Sir Reginald's death, under strange circumstances. The artist, a man named Elias Vane, vanished soon after. Some say the portrait captured more than Sir Reginald's likeness, perhaps his very essence." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "C'est intéressant. And these tears of blood, do the records speak of such a thing?" "Not directly," Miss Clara admitted, "but there's a passage about a curse. A servant, wronged by Sir Reginald, swore vengeance on his line. The chronicle is vague, but it mentions tears of sorrow that would mark the family's downfall." Poirot made a mental note of the servant's curse, though he dismissed the supernatural flourish. Curses were the inventions of men, not spirits. Still, the story could inspire someone to stage the bleeding portrait for their own ends. "Merci, mademoiselle. May I see these records myself?" Miss Clara hesitated, then handed him the tome. Poirot spent the next hour poring over its faded pages, his sharp eyes catching details of Sir Reginald's life, his acquisition of land through dubious means, his feuds with neighbouring families, and a cryptic reference to a lost heir who was never named. The little grey cells, as Poirot called them, began to hum. A historical grudge, perhaps, or a hidden claim to the estate could be at play. Leaving the library, Poirot sought out the groundskeeper, old Tom, whom Lady Eleanor had mentioned as a witness to strange occurrences. He found the man near the stables, a weathered figure with gnarled hands and a face like carved oak. Old Tom was raking leaves, his movements slow but deliberate. "Morning, sir," he said gruffly, eyeing Poirot's pristine suit with suspicion. "Monsieur Tom," Poirot began, undeterred by the man's wariness, "I am told you have seen lights in the manor's chapel at night. Tell me, if you please, what you observed." Old Tom leaned on his rake, his gaze distant. "Aye, lights, flickering, like candles, but no one supposed to be in the chapel after dark. Seen 'em thrice this past week, always near midnight. Gives me the chills, it does. That place ain't right." Poirot nodded, noting the groundskeeper's unease. "And have you entered the chapel to investigate?" "Not me, sir," old Tom said quickly. "That's hallowed ground, and I ain't one to tempt fate. But I reckon it's tied to that cursed portrait. Everyone knows Sir Reginald's spirit ain't at rest." "Merci, monsieur," Poirot said, his tone polite but firm. "I shall investigate this chapel myself." As he walked toward the manor's chapel, a small stone structure half hidden by overgrown yews, Poirot considered the groundskeeper's words. Lights in the chapel suggested activity. Perhaps someone staging the portrait's phenomenon or searching for something hidden. The chapel's door was ajar, revealing a dim interior smelling of damp stone and wax. Poirot stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. Stained glass windows cast fractured colours across the pews, and a faded tapestry depicted Sir Reginald in armour, his expression as severe as in the portrait. Poirot examined the altar, noting scuff marks on the floor, recent by their sharpness. Someone had been here, and not for prayer. He knelt, his magnifying glass revealing a faint smudge of red near the altar's base. Paint, blood, or the same substance as the portrait's tears. He collected a sample in a small vial, his mind racing. The chapel, like the gallery, was a stage for this mystery, but the actors remained hidden. Returning to the manor, Poirot encountered Beatrice in the hall, her dark shawl trailing like a shadow. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice soft but intense, "have you found anything yet? About the portrait, I mean." "Mademoiselle, I find many things," Poirot replied, his eyes studying her. "But tell me, what is your interest in this portrait? You seem drawn to it." Beatrice's cheeks flushed. "It's the history, monsieur. The Ashbournes are my family, and Sir Reginald's story fascinates me. If the portrait truly weeps, it could mean something profound." Poirot smiled faintly. Her passion was genuine, but was it innocent? Profound, perhaps, but truth is often simpler than legend. I shall keep you informed. As Beatrice retreated, Poirot returned to his room, his notebook filling with observations. The chronicle's tale of a curse, Old Tom's lights, the chapel's scuff marks, all were threads in a tapestry of deception. Someone was weaving a story to frighten or manipulate, and Poirot was determined to find the weaver. The manor's past, he sensed, held the key, but it was the present inhabitants who would reveal the truth. Chapter 3. The Locked Gallery. The morning mist had barely lifted from Ravenwood Manor's grounds, when Hercule Poirot, armed with his notebook and magnifying glass, made his way to the gallery. The bleeding portrait of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, with its crimson tears, was the heart of this mystery, and Poirot was determined to examine its stage, the Locked Gallery, more closely. Lady Eleanor had emphasized that only she and Mr. Harrow held keys to the heavy oak door, yet the phenomenon persisted, suggesting either betrayal or ingenuity. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with anticipation as he approached the door, his polished shoes clicking on the manor's stone floors. Lady Eleanor awaited him, her face pale but composed, the key trembling slightly in her hand. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I trust you'll find some explanation. This horror cannot continue. Madame, rest assured. Hercule Poirot does not rest until the truth is revealed," he replied, his voice calm but firm. She unlocked the door, and they stepped into the gallery, where the air was heavy with the scent of old varnish and dust. The portrait of Sir Reginald loomed at the far end, its crimson streaks now dried, but no less striking. Poirot's eyes swept the room, noting the high windows, too narrow for entry, and the gas lamps casting long shadows across the ancestral portraits. He approached the lock first, kneeling with his magnifying glass. The brass mechanism was old but sturdy, yet faint scratches marred its surface, recent by their brightness. "C'est curieux," he murmured. "This lock has been tampered with, madame. Perhaps a tool, something sharp and precise. When did you last use your key before the portrait began to weep?" Lady Eleanor frowned, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. "The day before Mr. Harrow reported it, 3 days ago, as I told you. I checked the gallery myself that evening, and all was well." Poirot nodded, filing away the timeline. "And Mr. Harrow, he too has access." "Yes," she said, hesitating. He's been loyal for decades, but he's been distracted lately. I thought it merely the strain of this affair." Poirot made a mental note to question the butler further. He turned his attention to the portrait, stepping closer. The crimson streaks were uneven, thicker in some places, as if applied with care rather than a spontaneous flow. He leaned in, his nose detecting that same faint chemical tang he had noticed before. Not blood, but something manufactured. He examined the frame, a heavy gilt affair, and ran his fingers along its edges. A slight irregularity caught his attention, a seam, almost invisible, where the frame met the canvas. "Interessant," he said softly, suspecting a hidden mechanism. Before he could investigate further, the door creaked open, and Charles Ashbourne strode in, his face flushed with irritation. "Mother, this is a waste of time," he snapped, barely glancing at Poirot. "We should be discussing the estate's future, not chasing fairy tales about bleeding paintings." Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. "Charles, please, Monsieur Poirot is our guest, and this matter is serious." "Serious?" Charles scoffed, his eyes darting to the portrait. "It's a stunt, probably by some servant with too much time on their hands. We're drowning in debt keeping this place, and you're entertaining a detective." Poirot observed Charles closely, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his hands clenched. "Monsieur Ashbourne," he said smoothly, "your concern for the manor's finances is noted. But tell me, have you observed this portrait since the phenomenon began?" Charles hesitated, his gaze flickering to the canvas. "Once. It's unsettling, I'll grant you. But it's no reason to keep this crumbling pile. The sooner we sell, the better." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "But the truth, it has a way of affecting such decisions. You have no theories about this stunt, as you call it?" "None," Charles said curtly, turning to leave. "I've business in London tomorrow. Sort this out, Mother, before it ruins us." As Charles departed, Beatrice entered, her dark shawl trailing behind her like a spectre. Her eyes were fixed on the portrait, a mix of awe and unease in her expression. "It's happened again, hasn't it?" she whispered. "Sir Reginald's tears." Poirot watched her closely. "Mademoiselle, you seem most affected by this portrait. Have you noticed anything unusual in this gallery, perhaps before the tears appeared?" Beatrice shook her head, her fingers twisting a strand of hair. "No, but I feel him sometimes, his presence. This manor holds so many secrets." Poirot's smile was polite but probing. "Secrets, yes, but they are often made by the living, not the dead. Merci, mademoiselle." With the gallery momentarily quiet, Poirot resumed his inspection. He tapped the frame gently, listening for hollow sounds, but found none. He then examined the floor beneath the portrait, noticing faint scuff marks, similar to those in the chapel. Someone had stood here recently, perhaps adjusting the portrait or its frame. He collected another sample of the crimson substance, noting its consistency matched the chapel's smudge. A pattern was emerging, but the motive remained elusive. At luncheon, the atmosphere was strained. Charles's absence left Lady Eleanor subdued, while Beatrice picked at her food, her eyes distant. Mr. Harrow served with mechanical precision, but Poirot caught him glancing nervously toward the gallery door. The conversation turned to the manor's upkeep, and Lady Eleanor admitted the estate's finances were stretched thin. "The roof needs repairs, and the taxes," she trailed off, her face drawn. Beatrice spoke up, her voice fervent. "We can't sell Ravenwood, Aunt Eleanor. It's our legacy, the portrait. It's a sign we must preserve it." Poirot sipped his wine, observing the interplay. Beatrice's passion for the manor contrasted sharply with Charles's pragmatism. Could one of them have orchestrated the phenomenon to sway Lady Eleanor? Or was Mr. Harrow, with his access and unease, the key? After luncheon, Poirot returned to the gallery alone, sketching the room's layout in his notebook. The tampered lock, the chemical scent, the scuff marks, all pointed to human intervention. But why? To frighten Lady Eleanor into selling, as Charles might wish? Or to preserve the manor's mystique, as Beatrice seemed to desire? And what of Mr. Harrow's role? His loyalty was unquestioned, yet his nervousness suggested a hidden burden. As the afternoon waned, Poirot stood before the portrait, its crimson tears a silent challenge. "Mon ami, Sir Reginald," he murmured, "you keep your secrets well, but Hercule Poirot, he is more stubborn than any ghost." The gallery's shadows deepened, and Poirot knew the answers lay not in curses, but in the hearts of those who walked these halls. He would watch, listen, and unravel the truth, one clue at a time. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Night. The clock in Ravenwood Manor's Grand Hall struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent corridors like a mournful toll. Hercule Poirot, who preferred the order of daytime investigations, found himself sleepless, his mind restless with the puzzle of the bleeding portrait. The tampered lock, the chemical scent, the scuff marks, all pointed to human hands. Yet the motive remained as elusive as the mist that cloaked the estate. He sat by the fire in his room, his notebook open, when a faint sound pierced the quiet. A cry, soft but unmistakable, drifting through the walls. Poirot's grey eyes sharpened. He set aside his pen, donned his dressing gown, and slipped into the darkened hallway, his small flashlight casting a narrow beam. The manor was a labyrinth of shadows, its tapestries and portraits seeming to watch his every move. The cry came again, fainter now, from the direction of the gallery. Poirot moved swiftly but silently, his polished shoes making no sound on the worn rugs. As he neared the gallery, he saw a figure in a dark shawl, her silhouette illuminated by a single candle. It was Beatrice Langley, her face pale, her eyes wide with something between fear and fascination. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, stepping into the candlelight, "what brings you to wander these halls at such an hour?" Beatrice gasped, nearly dropping her candle. "Monsieur Poirot, I heard him, Sir Reginald," his voice calling from the gallery. "I had to see." Poirot's moustache twitched slightly. "A voice, you say? C'est curieux. Show me, if you please, where you heard this." Beatrice led him to the gallery door, which stood ajar, despite Lady Eleanor's insistence that it remained locked at night. Poirot's flashlight swept over the lock, no new scratches, but the door's ease of movement suggested it had been left unlocked. Inside, the portrait of Sir Reginald loomed, its crimson tears dry but menacing in the dim light. The cry came again, a low, mournful sound, seeming to emanate from behind the portrait itself. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his skepticism tempered by curiosity. He approached the portrait, his flashlight tracing its frame. The chemical scent lingered, stronger now, as if recently renewed. He tapped the wall behind the canvas, listening for hollow spaces. A faint click rewarded his efforts, and a panel slid aside, revealing a narrow passage cloaked in darkness. Beatrice's breath caught. "A secret passage! I knew this manor held mysteries." Poirot raised a hand for silence, his flashlight probing the passage. Cobwebs clung to the walls, but the floor showed signs of recent disturbance. Dust swept aside, footprints faint but discernible. "Mademoiselle," Remain. Here, he instructed. This is no place for wandering spirits, only for the curious mind. Beatrice nodded, clutching her shawl as Poirot stepped into the passage. The air was damp and musty, the walls lined with rough stone. The passage sloped upward, its twists leading to a small attic room, barely large enough for a man to stand upright. A single grimy window let in slivers of moonlight, illuminating a pile of old trunks and papers. Poirot's flashlight swept over the clutter, settling on a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. He untied the bundle with care, his gloved fingers deft. The letters, dated from the late 17th century, were written in a hurried hand. One caught his eye, addressed to an unknown recipient. The heir is lost, cast out by Reginald's cruelty. His blood will haunt this house until justice is done. The signature was illegible, but the mention of a lost heir sent a spark through Poirot's mind. Could this be the servant wronged by Sir Reginald, as Miss Clara's chronicle suggested, or a descendant seeking vengeance? The cry sounded again, fainter now, echoing from below. Poirot tucked the letter into his pocket and retraced his steps, emerging to find Beatrice still by the portrait, her candle flickering. "Did you find anything?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Perhaps, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. "But tell me, have you ever heard of a lost heir in your family's history?" Beatrice's eyes widened. "There are rumours, yes. A child, disowned by Sir Reginald, who vanished from the records. Aunt Eleanor says it's just a story, but—" She trailed off, glancing at the portrait. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The passage, the letter, the cry, all suggested a staged drama. But to what end? To frighten Lady Eleanor? To bolster Beatrice's belief in the manor's mystique? Or to conceal a more tangible secret? He escorted Beatrice back to her room, noting her nervous glances toward the shadows. "Sleep, mademoiselle," he said gently. "The night holds no ghosts, only questions." Returning to his own room, Poirot examined the letter under lamplight. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but its words were clear. A lost heir could mean a claim to the estate, a motive for someone to stir unrest. He added the passage and letter to his notebook, sketching a rough map of the gallery and its hidden exit. The cry, he suspected, was no spirit but a sound carried through the passage, perhaps by design. At breakfast, the household was subdued. Lady Eleanor, informed of the night's events, looked shaken. "A secret passage?" she said, her voice faint. "I had no idea. This manor, it's full of surprises." Charles, who had returned from London, rolled his eyes. "More nonsense. First bleeding portraits, now hidden passages. This place is a money pit, mother. Sell it and be done." Beatrice glared at him. "You'd sell our heritage for a few pounds? The manor is our blood." Poirot sipped his coffee, observing the clash. Charles's desperation to sell contrasted with Beatrice's fervour to preserve. Mr. Harrow, serving silently, avoided Poirot's gaze, his hands unsteady. The butler knew more than he admitted, Poirot was certain. After breakfast, Poirot revisited the gallery, examining the passage's entrance. The mechanism was simple but clever, triggered by a hidden catch in the frame. Someone with knowledge of the manor's secrets had used it recently. He collected a sample of dust from the passage floor, noting its difference from the galleries. Finer, as if disturbed by frequent passage. As he stood before the portrait, Poirot felt the weight of Sir Reginald's painted gaze. "Mon ami," he murmured, "your tears are a performance, but for whom? And why?" The manor's secrets were unravelling, thread by thread. The lost heir, the passage, the cry, all pointed to a human hand, weaving fear and mystery. Poirot would follow these threads. His little grey cells poised to uncover the truth hidden in Ravenwood's shadows. Chapter 5. The Chemist's Secret. The morning light filtered weakly through Ravenwood Manor's tall windows, casting a pallor over the dining room, where Hercule Poirot sipped his tea. The mystery of the bleeding portrait weighed heavily on his mind, its crimson tears a puzzle that demanded scientific scrutiny. The chemical tang he had detected in the gallery, coupled with the tampered lock and the secret passage, pointed to a deliberate act. Someone was staging a spectacle, and Poirot was determined to unmask the culprit. His first task was to analyze the substance on the portrait, and for that, he needed an expert. After breakfast, Poirot arranged for a carriage to Ashbourne Hollow, where Dr. Frederick Langley, the village chemist and Beatrice's distant cousin, kept a modest shop. The journey was brief, the village a cluster of stone cottages nestled under the shadow of the manor's hill. Poirot stepped into the chemist's shop, a cramped space filled with shelves of vials, powders, and the sharp scent of solvents. Dr. Langley, a wiry man in his 50s with ink-stained fingers, looked up from a ledger, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the impeccably dressed detective. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume?" Dr. Langley said, his tone polite but guarded. "Lady Eleanor mentioned you might call. Something about the manor's peculiarities." "Précisément, monsieur," Poirot replied, producing a small vial containing a sample of the portrait's crimson streaks. "This substance, found on the portrait of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, is no blood, I suspect. I require your expertise to confirm its nature." Dr. Langley took the vial, his curiosity piqued. He adjusted his spectacles and set to work, heating a portion of the sample and testing it with reagents. Poirot watched closely, noting the chemist's deft movements. After several minutes, Dr. Langley straightened, his expression a mix of surprise and intrigue. "It's a mixture," he said. "Red aniline dye, commonly used in textiles, blended with a slow-dissolving resin to give it viscosity. Not blood, but designed to look like it. Clever, really." Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. "C'est comme je pensais. A chemical trick, then. Tell me, monsieur, who in Ashbourne Hollow might procure such materials?" Dr. Langley hesitated, his fingers drumming on the counter. "Aniline dye is common enough. Any tailor or artist might have it. The resin, though, is less usual. I stock it for sealing compounds, but I've not sold any recently. You'd need some knowledge of chemistry to mix it like this." Poirot nodded, his grey eyes sharp. "And you, monsieur, have such knowledge. As does perhaps your cousin Beatrice?" Dr. Langley's face tightened. "Beatrice? She's interested in books, not chemistry. Besides, she's devoted to the manor. Why would she tamper with it?" "Pourquoi, indeed?" Poirot said, his tone neutral. "Merci, monsieur. Your assistance is most valuable." Returning to Ravenwood, Poirot sought out Mr. Harrow, whose nervous demeanour in the gallery had not escaped his notice. He found the butler in the pantry, polishing silver with a fervour that suggested distraction. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot began, his voice gentle but probing. "A word, if you please. The portrait's tears, they are no miracle, but a chemical concoction. You have access to the gallery. Have you seen anything unusual?" Mr. Harrow's hands stilled, his face paling. I've told you, sir, it's unnatural. I've seen nothing but those tears, night after night." Poirot leaned closer, his eyes locking onto the butler's. "Mon ami, your loyalty to the Ashbournes is clear, but your unease betrays you. Tell me, what troubles you?" The butler's shoulders sagged, and for a moment Poirot glimpsed a man burdened by more than duty. "It's not my place to speak ill of the family," Harrow said, his voice low. But this manor, it's been my life, and theirs. My father served here, and his father before him. We've given everything to the Ashbournes, and now—" He stopped, his lips pressing into a thin line. "And now?" Poirot prompted, his tone encouraging but firm. Harrow shook his head. "It's nothing, sir. Just an old man's worries. The manor's falling apart, and there's talk of selling. It breaks my heart, that's all." Poirot noted the butler's evasion, suspecting a deeper grievance. He recalled Miss Clara's chronicle and the letter from the attic, mentioning a wronged servant and a lost heir. Could Harrow's family be tied to that history? "Merci, Monsieur Harrow," Poirot said. "But know this, the truth, it hides from no one, not even a loyal butler." As Harrow resumed his polishing, Poirot returned to his room, his notebook filling with new details. The jihad chemical mixture confirmed human intervention, and Dr. Langley's expertise raised the possibility of an outsider's involvement, or a family member with access to his shop. Beatrice, despite her cousin's defence, remained a person of interest, her fascination with the manor's legacy a potential motive. And Harrow's nervous loyalty hinted at a personal stake, perhaps rooted in the past. At dinner, the household was tense. Charles, still bristling from his London trip, argued with Lady Eleanor about the manor's upkeep costs. "We're bleeding money, Mother," he said, his fork clattering against his plate. "This detective nonsense won't fix the roof or pay the taxes." Beatrice's eyes flashed. "You'd sell our heritage for a quick profit, Charles. The portrait's tears are a warning. We can't ignore them." Lady Eleanor looked weary, her gaze shifting to Poirot. "Have you made progress, monsieur?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Madame, the tears are no miracle, but a clever trick. I'm closer to the truth, but it requires patience." Charles snorted, but Beatrice leaned forward, her voice intense. "A trick? But why? Who would do such a thing?" "That, mademoiselle," Poirot said, "is what I shall discover." After dinner, Poirot revisited the gallery, examining the portrait's frame again. The seam he had noticed before suggested a hidden compartment, but without tools, he could not probe further. He made a note to acquire a small screwdriver, suspecting a mechanism within. The chemical mixture, the tampered lock, the secret passage, all pointed to a coordinated effort, but the motive remained just out of reach. As he left the gallery, Poirot paused, hearing a faint creak from the secret passage. He shone his flashlight, but saw only shadows. Someone was watching, he was certain, but they were careful. "Eh bien," he murmured, "you play your game, but Hercule Poirot, he plays better." The manor's secrets were tightening like a noose, and Poirot felt the truth drawing closer. The chemist's revelation had narrowed the field, but the heart of the mystery, why the portrait wept, lay in the tangled motives of Ravenwood's inhabitants. Chapter 6. The Chapel's Riddle. The afternoon sky over Ravenwood Manor was heavy with clouds, casting a sombre light across the estate's overgrown grounds. Hercule Poirot, his coat buttoned against the chill, made his way to the manor's chapel. Spurred by old Tom's tale of flickering lights at midnight. The groundskeeper's words, tinged with superstition, had piqued Poirot's curiosity, for he suspected the chapel held clues to the mystery of the bleeding portrait. The chemical mixture, the tampered lock, the secret passage, and the letter about a lost heir, all pointed to a carefully orchestrated deception. And Poirot was determined to uncover the next thread in this intricate tapestry. The chapel, a small stone structure half concealed by twisted yews, stood apart from the manor, its arched windows dulled by grime. Poirot pushed open the creaking door, his flashlight cutting through the dim interior. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of old wax and moss. Stained glass windows depicted sombre saints, their colours muted by dust, while a faded tapestry of Sir Reginald Ashbourne in armour hung above the altar. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the space, recalling the scuff marks and red smudge he had found on his earlier visit. This time he sought something more, a connection to the portrait's tears. He approached the altar, a simple stone slab worn by time. The scuff marks were still visible, sharper near the base, suggesting recent activity. Poirot knelt, his magnifying glass revealing faint scratches around a loose stone in the altar's foundation. With careful pressure, he pried the stone free, revealing a small compartment. Inside lay a tarnished brass plate, engraved with a cryptic inscription, "Tears of vengeance shall flow until the debt is paid." Below it was a symbol, a crossed quill and dagger, unfamiliar but suggestive of a secret society or family crest. "C'est très intéressant," Poirot murmured, sketching the inscription and symbol in his notebook. The words echoed the letter from the attic, hinting at a historical grievance tied to Sir Reginald. Could this debt refer to the wronged servant Miss Clara had mentioned? Or was it a clue to a more recent scheme, cloaked in the manor's past? Poirot examined the compartment further, finding traces of the same red substance he had collected from the portrait and the chapel floor. The consistency matched Dr. Langley's analysis, a mixture of aniline dye and resin. Someone had been here, perhaps preparing the portrait's effect or using the chapel as a staging ground. He pocketed a sample, his mind racing. The chapel's isolation made it an ideal place for secrecy, but who had access and why? As he emerged from the chapel, Poirot encountered Charles Ashbourne, striding across the grounds with a scowl. "Monsieur Poirot," Charles said, his tone clipped, "still chasing ghosts? You'd do better to convince my mother to sell this place before it bankrupts us." Poirot tilted his head, studying Charles's flushed face. "Monsieur, your concern for the estate's finances is most evident, but tell me, have you visited the chapel recently? Perhaps at night, when lights have been seen?" Charles's eyes narrowed. "The chapel? I've no time for dusty relics. I'm trying to save what's left of our fortune, not wander around in the dark." "Bien sûr," Poirot said, his voice smooth. "But the truth, it often hides in such places. You have no knowledge of this inscription I have found?" Charles's jaw tightened, but he shook his head. "Inscriptions? More nonsense. If you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to." He stalked toward the manor, his agitation palpable. Poirot watched him go, noting the young man's haste. Charles's desperation to sell the manor suggested a motive, perhaps to escape a financial burden, or to conceal a secret tied to the estate. The chapel's clue, however, pointed to a deeper history. Poirot resolved to consult Miss Clara again, her knowledge of the Ashbourne Chronicles likely key to decoding the inscription. At dinner, the atmosphere was strained. Lady Eleanor, pale and withdrawn, picked at her meal, while Beatrice's eyes darted to the gallery door, as if expecting Sir Reginald himself to appear. Charles, unusually silent, drained his wine-glass with a grimace. Mr. Harrow served with his customary precision, but Poirot caught the butler's gaze lingering on Charles, a flicker of disapproval in his eyes. Lady Eleanor broke the silence. "Monsieur Poirot, have you made progress? This phenomenon is wearing on us all." Poirot set down his fork, his expression serene. "Madame, the portrait's tears are a human creation, and I have found further evidence in the chapel. A message of vengeance, perhaps tied to your family's past. Tell me, do you know of a debt owed by Sir Reginald?" Lady Eleanor frowned, her hands clasping tightly. "A debt? There are stories, yes, of a servant betrayed by Sir Reginald. A man named Thomas Vane, whose family was ruined after a dispute. But it's ancient history, surely." Beatrice leaned forward, her voice intense. "Ancient history can linger, Aunt Eleanor. The portrait, the chapel, they're connected. We can't ignore the signs." Charles slammed his glass down. "Enough, Beatrice. You and your fairy tales are driving us to ruin. The manor's a liability, and this nonsense only delays the inevitable. Charles, please," Lady Eleanor said, her voice sharp. "We will not sell Ravenwood. It's our legacy." Poirot observed the exchange, his grey cells cataloguing every word. Charles's outburst confirmed his financial desperation, while Beatrice's fervour suggested either genuine belief or a calculated performance. Mr. Harrow, clearing the plates, remained silent, but his unease was evident. After dinner, Poirot sought out Miss Clara in the library, presenting her with a sketch of the chapel's inscription. "Mademoiselle, this debt and symbol, do they appear in your chronicles?" Miss Clara adjusted her spectacles, studying the sketch. "The quill and dagger. It's unfamiliar, but the words resemble a passage about Thomas Vane. He was a scribe, loyal to Sir Reginald until a betrayal over land rights. His descendants swore to reclaim what was lost, but the symbol, I've not seen it before." Poirot nodded, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The chapel's inscription, the attic letter, the chemical tears, all suggested a modern scheme draped in historical vengeance. Was someone exploiting the legend of Thomas Vane to manipulate Lady Eleanor? Or was there a living descendant seeking justice through deception? As he returned to his room, Poirot paused by the gallery, the portrait's stern gaze meeting his own. "Mon ami, Sir Reginald," he murmured, "your debt is a riddle, but Hercule Poirot, he will solve it." The chapel's clue had tightened the web of suspicion, and Poirot felt the truth drawing nearer. The manor's past and present were intertwined, and the next step would be to unravel the motives of those who walked its halls. Chapter 7. A Crack in the Facade. The storm descended upon Ravenwood Manor with a fury that rattled its ancient windows and sent shadows dancing across the walls. Hercule Poirot, seated in his room with his notebook, paused as thunder rumbled, the sound echoing the unease that permeated the household. The mystery of the bleeding portrait had grown more intricate with each clue. The chemical mixture, the secret passage, the chapel's inscription. But the motive remained elusive. As lightning illuminated the manor's towers, a piercing scream shattered the night, drawing Poirot to his feet. He seized his flashlight and hurried into the corridor, where the air was thick with the scent of rain and wax. The scream had come from the gallery, and as Poirot approached, he found the household gathered before the portrait of Sir Reginald Ashbourne. Lady Eleanor, her face ashen, clutched Mr. Harrow's arm. Charles stood rigid, his eyes wide, while Beatrice stared at the portrait with an unsettling calm. The canvas glistened with fresh crimson streaks, the tears vivid against the painted face, as if Sir Reginald wept anew under the storm's wrath. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, stepping forward. The chemical tang was stronger now, confirming Dr. Langley's analysis of aniline dye and resin. He scanned the room, noting the locked door, still tampered, but closed, and the absence of immediate clues. The household's reactions, however, were a tableau of motives and fears. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling, "it's happened again. What does it mean?" Poirot's grey eyes gleamed. "Madame, It means someone wishes us to believe in miracles or curses, but Hercule Poirot believes in facts. Let us observe." He approached the portrait, his flashlight tracing the crimson streaks. They were freshly applied, the resin still tacky, suggesting the act had occurred moments before the scream. "Who discovered this?" he asked. "I did," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I couldn't sleep, so I came to check the gallery. The door was unlocked, and there it was." Poirot studied her, noting her composed demeanour. Her dark shawl hung loosely, and her hands were steady, unlike Lady Eleanor's trembling fingers or Mr. Harrow's nervous fidgeting. "Mademoiselle, you are remarkably calm for one who has seen such a sight. Tell me, what drew you here tonight?" Beatrice's eyes met his, a flicker of defiance in them. "I felt a pull. The manner speaks to me, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Reginald's spirit is restless." Charles snorted, breaking the tension. "For God's sake, Beatrice, enough of this nonsense. It's a trick, and I'm tired of it. Mother, we need to sell this place before it drives us all mad." "Charles, please," Lady Eleanor said, her voice sharp. "This is no time for arguments." Poirot raised a hand, his tone commanding silence. "Mes amis, your reactions are most revealing, but let us proceed with order. Monsieur Harrow, you locked the gallery tonight?" The butler nodded, his face pale. "Yes, sir, as always. I checked it at 10 o'clock. It was secure." "C'est curieux," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "Yet the door was unlocked. Someone has been busy." He made a mental note to inspect the lock again, suspecting further tampering. Determined to probe Beatrice's unusual calm, Poirot requested to see her room, citing a need to understand her connection to the manor's spirit. Beatrice hesitated, but led him upstairs, her candle casting eerie shadows. Her room was a shrine to the Ashbourne legacy, shelves lined with books on family history, occult rituals, and alchemy. Poirot's gaze settled on a small table, where a vial of red liquid sat beside a worn tome, titled The Art of the Alchemical Arts. "Mademoiselle, this is most interesting," Poirot said, lifting the vial. "This liquid, it resembles the portrait's tears, does it not?" Beatrice's cheeks flushed. "It's just paint. I use it for sketching. I'm no chemist, Monsieur Poirot." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone neutral. He opened the tome, finding passages on creating illusions with pigments and resins, recipes not unlike Dr. Langley's findings. "But your interest in alchemy, it suggests a fascination with this transformation, perhaps of a portrait's appearance?" Beatrice's eyes darted away. "I only want to preserve the manor's legacy. The portrait's tears are a sign, a warning. We can't ignore them." Poirot nodded, pocketing the vial for later analysis. "Merci, mademoiselle. Your passion is noted, but passion can sometimes blind us to the truth." Returning to the gallery, Poirot gathered the household, using the stormy night to heighten their unease. "Mes amis," he said, standing before the portrait, "this phenomenon is no curse, but a human act. The tears are a mixture, applied with care. Someone among us knows more than they admit. I ask you to reflect. Who benefits from fear?" Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand clutching her necklace. Charles's face darkened, but he remained silent. Mr. Harrow stared at the floor, his hands trembling. Beatrice, however, met Poirot's gaze, her expression unreadable. The silence was broken only by the storm's howl, and Poirot knew he had struck a nerve. After dismissing the household, Poirot examined the portrait's frame again, his flashlight revealing the seam he had noticed before. Using a small screwdriver procured from the manor's toolkit, he probed the seam, finding a thin tube hidden within, a delivery system for the crimson mixture, likely triggered remotely. The ingenuity confirmed his suspicions. This was no amateur prank, but a calculated scheme. As he retired to his room, Poirot updated his notebook, sketching the tube's mechanism and listing the household's reactions. Beatrice's calm, her occult books and the vial suggested involvement, but her motive, preserving the manor, seemed at odds with Charles's desire to sell. Mr. Harrow's nervousness hinted at complicity, perhaps under duress. Lady Eleanor's fear appeared genuine, but even she might hide a secret. The storm raged on, lightning illuminating the portrait's stern face in Poirot's mind. "Mon ami, Sir Reginald," he murmured, "your tears are a mask, but for whose face?" The crack in the household's facade had widened, revealing glimpses of truth. Poirot felt the mystery's threads tightening, each clue a step closer to unmasking the saboteur. The night's drama had served its purpose, and he would use it to unravel the secrets of Ravenwood Manor. Chapter 8. The Missing Heirloom. The storm had passed, leaving Ravenwood Manor cloaked in a damp, oppressive silence. Hercule Poirot, ever alert to the rhythms of a household in distress, sensed a new tension at breakfast. Lady Eleanor's face was drawn, her eyes red-rimmed, and the absence of her customary ruby pendant, a family heirloom tied to the legend of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, did not escape Poirot's notice. The bleeding portrait with its chemical tears and hidden mechanism had already revealed a calculated deception, but this new development suggested a broader scheme. As Poirot sipped his coffee, he resolved to uncover the connection between the portrait and the missing jewel. Lady Eleanor broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, a calamity has struck. My ruby pendant, passed down through generations, is gone. It was in my jewellery box last night, and now—" She trailed off, her hands twisting a napkin. Poirot's grey eyes sharpened. "Madam, this pendant, it is significant, yes? Tell me of its history." Lady Eleanor nodded, her gaze distant. "It's said to have been Sir Reginald's gift to his wife, a symbol of their bond. The legend claims it holds the heart of the Ashbournes, tied to the portrait's curse. I wore it daily for tradition, but now it's vanished." Beatrice, seated across the table, leaned forward, her dark shawl slipping slightly. "It's no coincidence, Aunt Eleanor. The portrait's tears, now this theft. It's a warning. We must protect the manor." Charles slammed his fork down. His face flushed. "Enough, Beatrice! Warnings, curses! This is madness. The pendant's probably been stolen by some servant to pawn it. We're drowning in debt, and you're chasing ghosts." Poirot observed the shrill exchange, noting Charles' agitation and Beatrice's fervour. Mr. Harrow, serving silently, avoided eye contact, his hands unsteady as he poured tea. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing, "you have access to Lady Eleanor's quarters. Have you seen anything unusual?" Harrow's face paled. "No, sir. I'd never touch her ladyship's things. I locked her room last night, as always." "Bien sûr," Poirot said, his smile polite but piercing. He made a mental note to inspect the jewellery box, suspecting further tampering. Determined to pursue the theft, Poirot requested to see the grounds, guided by old Tom, the groundskeeper. The old man led him toward the estate's lake, a glassy expanse fringed by reeds, where Poirot noticed disturbed earth near the water's edge. Kneeling, he examined fresh footprints. Small, likely a woman's, and a deeper set, possibly a man's. Nearby, a scrap of red ribbon, similar to those in Beatrice's room, caught his eye. He pocketed it, his mind racing. The lake was an odd place for a theft's evidence, unless the pendant had been hidden or discarded. "Monsieur Tom," Poirot said, "have you seen anyone near the lake recently?" Old Tom scratched his weathered chin. "I saw Miss Beatrice walking here 2 nights ago, looking troubled. And Master Charles, he's been pacing the grounds, muttering about money." Poirot nodded, the footprints aligning with his suspicions. Returning to the manor, he confronted Charles in the study, where the young man was poring over financial ledgers. "Monsieur Ashbourne," Poirot began, "your concern for the estate's finances is clear, but this pendant's theft. Perhaps it was taken to ease such burdens?" Charles's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you accusing me? I'd never steal from my own mother. But I'll admit, I've debts, gambling mostly. Selling the manor is our only hope, but she won't listen." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Merci for your candour, but tell me, have you heard of a second portrait in the manor, perhaps tied to the pendant?" Charles frowned, caught off guard. "A second portrait? Number Beatrice might know. She's obsessed with family law. Ask her." Intrigued by Charles's reaction, Poirot revisited the attic where he had found the letter about a lost heir. Among the dusty papers, he uncovered another document, a faded inventory from 1683, listing a companion portrait to Sir Reginald's, depicting a woman hidden for the family's honour. The inventory hinted at its location in a concealed room, possibly in the manor's basement. Poirot's grey cells hummed. A second portrait could explain the staged tears, a distraction from a larger secret. He sought out Beatrice, finding her in the library with Miss Clara, poring over a book of Ashbourne genealogy. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, holding up the red ribbon, "this was found by the lake, near footprints that may be yours. And this inventory, it speaks of a second portrait. What do you know of it?" Beatrice's face paled, but she recovered quickly. "The ribbon? I often walk by the lake. It must have fallen. As for a second portrait, I've heard rumours, but nothing more. Why would it matter?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps it matters greatly, mademoiselle. Secrets, they have a way of bleeding through, like tears." Miss Clara adjusted her spectacles, her voice hesitant. "There are tales of a portrait of Thomas Vane's sister, painted alongside Sir Reginald's. It was hidden after a scandal. I don't know where." Poirot thanked them, his mind piecing together the puzzle. The pendant's theft, the footprints, the second portrait, all suggested a scheme rooted in the manor's history. Was the theft a desperate act by Charles to cover his debts? Or was Beatrice, with her occult leanings, staging a drama to preserve the estate? And what of the second portrait? Could it hold the key to the debt mentioned in the chapel's inscription? That evening, Poirot examined Lady Eleanor's jewellery box, finding faint scratches on the lock, similar to those on the gallery door. The theft was no amateur act, but a calculated move. He added the ribbon and inventory to his notebook, sketching a timeline of events. The lake, the pendant, the portraits, all were threads in a web of deception, and Poirot was closing in on the weaver. As he stood by his window, watching the moon rise over the lake, Poirot murmured, "Mon ami, Sir Reginald, your legacy is a heavy one, but Hercule Poirot, he will lift its veil." The missing heirloom had added a new dimension to the mystery, and Poirot knew the truth was near. The manor's secrets were unravelling, and the next clue would bring him closer to the heart of the deception. Chapter 9. The Second Portrait. The air in Ravenwood Manor seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, as if the weight of its secrets pressed against the very walls. Hercule Poirot, his mind alight with the clues accumulated, The chemical tears, the secret passage, the chapel's inscription, and the stolen ruby pendant felt the mystery drawing toward a critical juncture. The faded inventory he had uncovered in the attic, mentioning a companion portrait hidden for the family's honor, suggested a new avenue of investigation. If a second portrait existed, it might hold the key to the bleeding portrait's purpose, and Poirot was determined to find it. After a quiet luncheon, where Charles's sullen silence and Beatrice's fervent glances at Lady Eleanor hinted at mounting tension, Poirot requested Miss Clara's assistance. The librarian, with her intimate knowledge of the manor's history, was best suited to guide him to the concealed room mentioned in the inventory. Miss Clara, her spectacles glinting in the dim light of the library, hesitated when Poirot presented the document. "A second portrait?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've heard whispers of it, Monsieur Poirot, but I thought it a myth. The inventory, it's so old." "Mademoiselle, myths often cloak truths," Poirot replied, his grey eyes piercing. "The inventory suggests a basement room. Will you show me where such a place might be?" Miss Clara led him through a maze of corridors to a narrow staircase descending into the manor's underbelly. The air grew colder, the scent of damp stone and mildew replacing the manor's usual aroma of wax and old wood. At the foot of the stairs, a rusted iron door stood, its lock encrusted with age. Miss Clara produced a key from her apron, her hands trembling slightly. "This leads to the old storage rooms," she said. "They're rarely used now." Poirot noted her unease, filing it away for later scrutiny. The door creaked open, revealing a low-ceilinged chamber lined with crumbling crates and cobwebs. His flashlight swept the space, settling on a section of wall where the stonework seemed newer, less weathered. He tapped it, hearing a hollow echo. "Is it icy?" he murmured, searching for a catch. His fingers found a loose brick, and with a gentle push, a panel slid aside, revealing a small concealed room. Inside, the air was stifling, the walls bare except for a single portrait leaning against the far wall. Unlike Sir Reginald's stern visage, this painting depicted a woman, her features delicate, her eyes filled with sorrow. The resemblance to Sir Reginald was striking, suggesting a familial tie, perhaps the sister of Thomas Vane, the betrayed servant mentioned in Miss Clara's chronicles. The canvas was pristine, untouched by the crimson streaks that marred the gallery portrait. Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. This was no coincidence. "Mon Dieu, mademoiselle," he said, turning to Miss Clara. "This portrait, it is tied to the legend of Thomas Vane, is it not?" Miss Clara's face paled, her hands clasping tightly. I believe so. The stories say Sir Reginald betrayed Thomas Vane's sister, Margaret, casting her out after a scandal. This must be her portrait, hidden to protect the family's name." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet you knew of this room, mademoiselle. Why did you not speak of it before?" "I was afraid," Miss Clara admitted, her voice breaking. "The manor's secrets, they're dangerous. I thought the portrait was just a story, like the curse." Poirot studied her, sensing truth mixed with evasion. "Merci, mademoiselle. But fear, it often hides more than it protects. You will tell me if you recall more, yes?" She nodded, retreating as Poirot examined the portrait. The frame was simple, unadorned, but a faint inscription at the base read, "Margaret Vane, wronged but remembered." The words echoed the chapel's tears of vengeance, suggesting the bleeding portrait was a distraction, perhaps to conceal this hidden image or its significance. Poirot hypothesized that someone was using the legend of Margaret Vane to manipulate the household. But why? Returning to the manor, Poirot sought out Lady Eleanor. Finding her in the drawing-room, staring at a fire that did little to warm the chill. "Madam," he said, "I have found a second portrait of Margaret Vane, hidden in the basement. It is tied to your family's history. Does this name mean anything to you?" Lady Eleanor's eyes widened. "Margaret Vane. I've heard the name in old tales, a servant's sister, disgraced by Sir Reginald. But a portrait? I had no idea." Her surprise seemed genuine, but Poirot pressed further. And the ruby pendant? Could it be linked to Margaret? Perhaps a token of her betrayal? Lady Eleanor shook her head. The pendant was Sir Reginald's gift to his wife, not Margaret. But the stories are muddled. I don't know. At dinner the household was subdued. Charles, informed of the portrait's discovery, scoffed. "Another relic to waste money on. This place is a tomb, Mother." Beatrice, however, leaned forward, her eyes alight. "Margaret Vane's portrait. It proves the manor's history is alive, Aunt Eleanor. We must keep it." Poirot observed their reactions, noting Charles's dismissal and Beatrice's intensity. Mr. Harrow, serving silently, avoided his gaze, but Poirot caught a flicker of recognition when Margaret's name was mentioned. The butler's connection to the manor's past, hinted at in his earlier words, warranted closer scrutiny. After dinner, Poirot revisited the basement, ensuring the portrait remained undisturbed. He collected a sample of dust from the room, noting its similarity to that in the secret passage. Someone had been here recently, perhaps to hide or reveal the portrait. The absence of crimson streaks suggested it was not part of the bleeding spectacle, but a clue to the larger scheme. In his room, Poirot updated his notebook, sketching the second portrait and its inscription. Margaret Vane's story, betrayal, disgrace, and a hidden legacy, mirrored the chapel's riddle and the attic letter. The ruby pendant's theft, the chemical tears, the footprints by the lake, all pointed to a modern plot exploiting the manor's history. Was Beatrice orchestrating a myth to preserve the estate? Was Charles seeking to profit from chaos? Or did Mr. Harrow, with his long family ties, hold the key? As moonlight filtered through his window, Poirot stood, his gaze fixed on the distant chapel. "Mademoiselle Margaret," he murmured, "your sorrow is a clue, and Hercule Poirot, he will follow it." The second portrait had unveiled a new layer of the mystery, and Poirot felt the truth drawing closer. The manor's past and present were colliding, and the next revelation would bring him nearer to the saboteur's identity. Chapter 10. The Midnight Confession. The moon hung low over Ravenwood Manor, its pale light casting eerie shadows through the gallery's high windows. Hercule Poirot stood before the portrait of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, its crimson tears a silent accusation in the dim glow of gas lamps. The clues had multiplied, the chemical mixture, the secret passage, the chapel's inscription, the stolen ruby pendant, and the second portrait of Margaret Vane. But the motive behind the bleeding portrait remained elusive. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with the certainty that the truth lay in the hearts of the household, and tonight he would apply pressure to crack their facades. Earlier that day, Poirot had confronted Mr. Harrow in the pantry, where the butler was polishing silver with a nervous intensity. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot had said, his voice soft but unyielding, "the portrait's tears are a chemical trick, delivered through a tube in the frame. You have access to the gallery. I ask you plainly, have you played a part in this deception?" Harrow's hands froze, his face draining of colour. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant howl of wind. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he confessed, I tampered with the frame, Monsieur Poirot. But I swear I was forced. I can't say by whom, not yet. Please, I've served the Ashbournes all my life. I meant no harm. Poirot's eyes narrowed, noting the butler's fear. Mon ami, coercion is a heavy burden, but the truth is heavier still. You will tell me more in time. For now, say nothing to the others. Harrow nodded, his shoulders sagging, and Poirot left him to his task, satisfied that the confession was a step toward unravelling the mystery. The butler's involvement suggested a larger scheme, with someone pulling the strings. To expose them, Poirot devised a plan, a midnight gathering in the gallery, where the atmosphere of the H.E.O. bleeding portrait would loosen tongues and reveal truths. At 11:30, Poirot summoned the household, requesting their presence in the gallery under the pretext of a new discovery. Lady Eleanor arrived first, her face pale but composed, clutching a shawl against the night's chill. Charles followed, his scowl betraying irritation, while Beatrice entered with an air of anticipation, her dark eyes fixed on the portrait. Mr. Harrow lingered by the door, his hands clasped tightly, avoiding Poirot's gaze. Mes amis, Poirot began, standing before the portrait, its crimson streaks gleaming in the lamplight. Tonight, we stand in the presence of a deception. The tears of Sir Reginald are no curse, but a human act, a mixture of dye and resin, delivered through a hidden tube. Someone among us has orchestrated this spectacle, and I intend to uncover why. Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand rising to her throat. A deception! But who would do such a thing? Charles crossed his arms, his voice sharp. This is absurd. You're saying someone's playing a prank? For what? To scare us into keeping this money pit? Beatrice's voice cut through, fervent and trembling. It's not a prank, Charles. The portrait weeps because the manor's legacy is at stake. Sir Reginald's spirit demands we protect it. Poirot turned to her, his expression calm but probing. Mademoiselle Beatrice, your passion for the manor is evident, but passion can lead to exaggeration. Tell me, have you ever handled the chemicals that make these tears? Beatrice's eyes widened, her composure cracking. Me? No, I only want to save Ravenwood. The tears, the pendant's theft, Margaret Vane's portrait, they're signs. We can't sell our heritage. Her voice rose, and she stepped toward the portrait, her hands trembling. Sir Reginald knows what we've done, ignoring our history, letting the manor decay. I've studied the old rites, the alchemical texts. I thought I could make it right. Poirot's moustache twitched, his grey cells cataloguing her outburst. Mademoiselle, you speak of rights. Did you perhaps seek to make the portrait weep, to prove this legacy? Beatrice's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. No, I read about such things, but I didn't do it. I swear, I only wanted to honour the Ashbournes. Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to the others. Charles's scowl had deepened, his fists clenched, while Lady Eleanor looked shaken, her eyes darting between her niece and son. Mr. Harrow, still by the door, seemed to shrink into himself, his silence deafening. Mes amis, Poirot continued, his voice rising slightly. The truth is near. Monsieur Harrow has admitted to tampering with the frame under duress. Someone commanded him, and I believe that someone is in this room. Speak now, or the little grey cells, they will find you out. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the distant creak of the manor's timbers. Charles stepped forward, his voice low. Harrow, you, what's this about? Harrow's lips parted, but no words came. Lady Eleanor intervened, her voice firm. "Monsieur Poirot, this is too much. Mr. Harrow is loyal. Surely there's a mistake." Poirot raised a hand. "Madam, there is no mistake. The portrait's mechanism, the stolen pendant, the hidden portrait of Margaret Vane, all are parts of a puzzle. Someone seeks to manipulate you, perhaps to keep the manor or to force its sale. I ask you all to reflect who benefits from this fear." Beatrice sank into a chair, her sobs quiet but audible. Charles glared at Harrow, while Lady Eleanor's face betrayed a mix of fear and resolve. Poirot dismissed them, his plan having sown the seeds of doubt. The gallery's atmosphere had worked its magic, cracking Beatrice's facade and confirming Harrow's complicity. In his room, Poirot updated his notebook, sketching the gallery's layout and noting the household's reactions. Beatrice's breakdown suggested genuine belief, but her occult knowledge made her a suspect. Harrow's confession pointed to coercion, but by whom? Charles's anger and Lady Eleanor's protectiveness hinted at deeper motives. The second portrait, the chapel's inscription, and the pendant's theft all pointed to a scheme exploiting the manor's history. As he gazed out at the moonlit grounds, Poirot murmured, "Mon ami, Sir Reginald, your tears are a performance, but the curtain is rising on the truth." The midnight confession had tightened the web, and Poirot knew the next revelation would unmask the saboteur. The manor's secrets were unraveling, and he was ready to pull the final thread. Chapter 11. The Web of Motives. The dawn broke over Ravenwood Manor with a reluctant light, the mist curling around its towers like a shroud. Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, had spent the night piecing together the puzzle of the bleeding portrait. The chemical tears, the secret passage, the chapel's inscription, the stolen ruby pendant, the second portrait of Margaret Vane, and Mr. Harrow's confession under duress, all pointed to a deliberate scheme. Mr. Harrow's admission had cracked the household's facade, but the mastermind remained hidden. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with the certainty that the motive lay in the manor's present, not its cursed past. And today he would tighten the net around the suspects. After a breakfast marked by strange silence, Charles's scowl, Beatrice's red-rimmed eyes, and Lady Eleanor's weary resignation, Poirot requested access to the manor's financial records. Lady Eleanor, though hesitant, granted permission, leading him to the study where ledgers were kept. The room was cluttered with papers, a stark contrast to Poirot's preference for order, but he set to work, his sharp eyes scanning columns of figures. Among the records, he found correspondence that made his moustache twitch, a letter from a London estate agent addressed to Charles, discussing a potential buyer for Ravenwood Manor, dated weeks before the portrait began to weep. "C'est très intéressant," Poirot murmured, tucking the letter into his notebook. The letter revealed Charles's secret negotiations to sell the estate, despite Lady Eleanor's opposition. Could the bleeding portrait be a ploy to pressure her into agreeing, or to distract from his dealings? Charles's gambling debts, confessed earlier, suggested desperation, but Poirot needed more evidence to confirm his role. Seeking further clues, Poirot turned his attention to old Tom, the groundskeeper, whose mention of lights in the chapel and presence near the lake had raised suspicions. He found the old man in his cottage near the stables, a modest dwelling cluttered with gardening tools and fishing gear. Old Tom was sharpening a scythe, his weathered hands steady, but his eyes wary as Poirot approached. "Monsieur Tom," Poirot said, his tone polite but probing, "you have served the Ashbournes many years, yes?" Tell me, have you ever worked on the gallery's lock, perhaps with tools like these?" He gestured to a small toolbox on a shelf, where a set of fine picks caught his eye. Old Tom's grip tightened on the scythe. "The gallery. Ain't been near it, sir. Them tools are for fixing fences, nothing more." Poirot smiled faintly, stepping closer to the toolbox. "Perhaps, but may I see?" Without waiting for permission, he opened the box, revealing a slender pick with scratches matching those on the gallery's lock. "Mon Dieu, these are most precise. They could open a lock, no?" Old Tom's face reddened. "I don't know nothing about that. I keep to my garden." "Bien sûr," Poirot said, his voice smooth. "But the truth, it has a way of growing, like your weeds." He pocketed the pick for later comparison, noting Old Tom's agitation. The groundskeeper's tools suggested he could be an accomplice, perhaps aiding the portrait's sabotage or the pendant's theft. Returning to the manor, Poirot confronted Charles in the drawing room, presenting the letter from the estate agent. "Monsieur Ashbourne," he said, "you have been negotiating to sell Ravenwood against your mother's wishes. The bleeding portrait, perhaps it is a distraction to sway her decision." Charles's face flushed, his fists clenching. "You've been snooping in my papers?" "Yes, I've talked to buyers. The manor's a ruin, and my debts are crushing me, but I didn't touch that damned portrait." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the ruby pendant? It's theft. It could cover such debts, no?" Charles stood abruptly, his voice rising. "I'm no thief. If you're looking for culprits, ask Beatrice. She's obsessed with keeping this place, curse and all. Or Harrow. He's been skulking about more than usual." Poirot noted Charles' deflection, filing it away. At dinner, the household's tension was palpable. Lady Eleanor, informed of the financial letter, looked betrayed, her gaze fixed on Charles. "You went behind my back," she said, her voice trembling. "Ravenwood is our home, not a commodity." Beatrice's eyes blazed. "You see, Aunt Eleanor, Charles would sell our soul. The portrait, the pendant, they're signs we must fight for our legacy." Mr. Harrow, serving silently, dropped a plate, the crash startling the room. His face was ashen, and Poirot caught a glance of guilt or fear in his eyes. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot said, "your nerves, they betray you. Perhaps you wish to add to your confession." Harrow shook his head, retreating to the kitchen. Poirot's mind raced, connecting the dots. The financial records confirmed Charles's motive to sell, potentially driving him to stage the portrait's tears to pressure Lady Eleanor. Old Tom's tools implicated him as an accomplice, possibly coerced like Harrow. Beatrice's fervour suggested she might counter Charles's plans with her own scheme, using the manor's myths. The pendant's theft, tied to the lake's footprints, hinted at a separate crime, perhaps to fund Charles' debts or fuel Beatrice's obsession. After dinner, Poirot revisited the gallery, examining the portrait's hidden tube. The mechanism was sophisticated, requiring access and knowledge. Harrow's tampering, Old Tom's tools, or Beatrice's alchemical studies could explain it. He cross-referenced the lock scratches with the pick from Old Tom's cottage, finding a near-perfect match. The web of motives was tightening, each suspect entangled in their own desires. In his room, Poirot updated his notebook, sketching a diagram of the suspect's connections. Charles's financial desperation, Beatrice's legacy-driven passion, Harrow's coerced tampering, and Old Tom's tools formed a pattern, a coordinated effort to manipulate Lady Eleanor, either to keep or sell the manor. The second portrait of Margaret Vane and the chapel's inscription suggested a historical pretext, exploited for modern gain. As he gazed at the moonlit grounds, Poirot murmured, "Mon ami, Sir Reginald, your tears weave a web, but Hercule Poirot, he will untangle it." The motives were clear, the accomplices revealed, and the truth was within reach. One final push, Poirot knew, would unravel the deception and expose the mastermind behind Ravenwood's mystery. Chapter 12. The Truth Unveiled. The gallery of Ravenwood Manor was a theatre of shadows, as Hercule Poirot stood before the portrait of Sir Reginald Ashbourne, its crimson tears gleaming under the flickering gas lamps. The storm had long passed, but a restless energy lingered in the air, as if the manor itself awaited the resolution of its mystery. Poirot had summoned the household. Lady Eleanor, Charles, Beatrice, Mr. Harrow, and even old Tom, for a final reckoning. The clues had aligned: the chemical mixture, the secret passage, the chapel's inscription, the stolen ruby pendant, the second portrait of Margaret Vane, and Mr. Harrow's coerced confession. Tonight, Poirot would unravel the web of deception and expose the truth. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding, "we gather before this portrait, which has wept tears of crimson, not by curse, but by human hands. The mystery of Ravenwood Manor is no supernatural affair, but a scheme rooted in greed, fear, and ambition. Allow Hercule Poirot to reveal the truth." Lady Eleanor, seated in a high-backed chair, clutched her shawl, her face pale. Charles stood rigidly, his jaw tight, while Beatrice's eyes darted to the portrait, a mix of defiance and dread in her gaze. Mr. Harrow hovered by the door, his hands clasped, and old Tom, unaccustomed to the manor's interior, shifted uncomfortably. Poirot paced before the portrait, his hands clasped behind his back. "The tears, they are a mixture of aniline dye and resin, as confirmed by Dr. Langley. A tube hidden in the frame, discovered by my own investigation, delivered this concoction. The lock tampered with allowed access, and the secret passage provided secrecy. But why? To frighten Madame Eleanor into selling the manor, or to preserve its legacy?" He turned to Charles, his grey eyes piercing. "Monsieur Ashbourne, your financial records reveal secret negotiations to sell Ravenwood, driven by gambling debts. You wish to force your mother's hand, yes?" Charles's face reddened. "I've admitted my debts, but I didn't touch the portrait. I wanted to sell, not scare anyone." "Précisément," Poirot said, raising a finger. "But you did not act alone. Mademoiselle Beatrice, your passion for the manor's legacy is profound, yet your room held a vial of red liquid and books on alchemy mirroring the portrait's tears. You spoke of signs, of Sir Reginald's spirit. Was this to convince Madame Eleanor to keep the manor?" Beatrice's hands trembled, her voice rising. "I only wanted to protect Ravenwood. It's our heritage, not a commodity for Charles to sell." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting between them. "And so a collaboration was born, a strange alliance. Charles, you sought to sell, but Beatrice, you sought to preserve. Together you devised the bleeding portrait, a spectacle to sway Madame Eleanor. Charles, you provided the motive. Beatrice, the method, with your knowledge of alchemical illusions. Monsieur Harrow, coerced by both, tampered with the frame, yes?" Harrow's shoulders sagged, his voice hoarse. "Yes, sir. They threatened to dismiss me, to ruin my family's name. I had no choice." Lady Eleanor gasped, her eyes wide. "Charles, Beatrice, is this true?" Charles's defiance crumbled. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I just wanted the money to clear my debts. Beatrice suggested the portrait. It was her idea to use the old curse story." Beatrice sobbed, her composure shattering. "I thought if Mother saw the tears, she'd fight to keep Ravenwood. I used the chemicals, the tube. I learned it from my books, but I didn't mean harm." Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. And the ruby pendant, Monsieur Charles. Its theft was your doing, to fund your debts, yes? The footprints by the lake, one set matching your boots, another Beatrice's. She followed you, perhaps to ensure your loyalty to the plan. Charles hung his head. I took it. I thought I could pawn it quietly, but Beatrice caught me. She insisted we keep up the portrait scheme instead. Poirot turned to the portrait, gesturing to its frame. The mechanism was clever, hidden in the seam, activated by a remote trigger through the secret passage. Old Tom's tools, found in his cottage, aided the lock's tampering under your orders, yes? Old Tom, startled, muttered, I only lent 'em my picks. Didn't know what for. Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. The second portrait of Margaret Vane, the chapel's inscription, the attic letter, all were distractions, amplifying the legend of a curse to mask your scheme. You exploited the manor's history, weaving a tale of vengeance to manipulate Madame Eleanor's heart. Lady Eleanor rose, her voice trembling but firm. How could you, both of you? Ravenwood is our home, not a stage for your schemes. Poirot bowed slightly. Madam, the human heart is complex, driven by fear and desire. Charles sought freedom from debt. Beatrice, to preserve a legacy. Together they created a mystery, but Hercule Poirot, he sees through such shadows. Beatrice fell to her knees, weeping. I'm sorry, Aunt Eleanor. I thought I was saving us. Charles's voice was low. I just wanted out. I'm sorry, Mother. Poirot stepped back, his gaze sweeping the room. The pendant? It is hidden by the lake, Monsieur Charles. You will retrieve it. The portrait's tears will cease, for the mechanism is now known. The truth is unveiled, and Ravenwood may heal. As the household dispersed, Lady Eleanor lingered, her eyes on the portrait. Monsieur Poirot, how can I thank you? This betrayal, it cuts deeply. Madame, Poirot said gently, the truth, it is painful, but it frees us. You will decide Ravenwood's fate, not fear. In his room, Poirot updated his notebook, sketching the final connections. Charles's debts, Beatrice's alchemy, Harrow's coercion, Old Tom's tools. The chapel's inscription and Margaret Vane's portrait had been props in their drama, but the motive was modern money and legacy. He closed the book, satisfied. The web of motives had been untangled, and the bleeding portrait's mystery was solved. As he gazed at the moonlit grounds, Poirot murmured, Mon ami, Sir Reginald, your tears are dry now, and Hercule Poirot, he has restored order. The truth had been unveiled, and Ravenwood Manor stood poised for a new, ushered chapter, free from the shadows of deception. Chapter 13. The Manor's Legacy. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a tentative golden glow over Ravenwood Manor, as if to cleanse the shadows of its recent turmoil. Hercule Poirot stood at his window, his suitcase packed, his notebook closed, the mystery of the bleeding portrait resolved. The revelation in the gallery, Charles and Beatrice's collaboration to stage the Crimson Tears, Mr. Harrow's coerced tampering, and Old Tom's unwitting aid, had unravelled a scheme born of desperation and devotion. Yet the manor's future hung in the balance, and Poirot lingered to witness the household's reckoning before his departure. In the drawing-room, Lady Eleanor sat with a quiet dignity, her face etched with both sorrow and resolve. The ruby pendant, retrieved from its hiding place near the lake under Charles's reluctant guidance, rested on the table before her, its deep red facets catching the light. Charles stood by the fireplace, his usual defiance replaced by a weary slump, while Beatrice, her eyes red from tears, clutched a shawl as if it could shield her from her guilt. Mr. Harrow hovered near the door, his loyalty to the Ashbournes unshaken despite his role, and Old Tom, summoned from his cottage, stood awkwardly, cap in hand. "Madame," Poirot began, his voice gentle but clear, "the truth has been unveiled, and Ravenwood's secrets are laid bare. The portrait's tears were a deception, crafted to sway your heart. But now you must decide the manor's fate." Lady Eleanor's gaze settled on the pendant, her fingers tracing its edge. "Monsieur Poirot, your clarity has saved us from further deceit. Charles, Beatrice, you betrayed my trust, yet you are my family. Ravenwood is our home, our legacy, and I cannot abandon it." Charles looked up, his voice hoarse. "Mother, I'm sorry. I was drowning in debt, and I thought selling was the only way. I never meant to hurt you." Beatrice's voice trembled. "I only wanted to protect Ravenwood, Aunt Eleanor. I thought the tears would make you see its worth. I was wrong." Lady Eleanor's eyes softened, but her tone was firm. "You both acted out of fear and folly, but I will not cast you out. Ravenwood will remain, but not as it was. I've decided to preserve it as a historical site, open to scholars and visitors. Its legacy will endure, but under strict oversight. Charles, you will manage its finances, no more secrets. Beatrice, you will assist Miss Clara in cataloguing our history to ensure it is honoured, not manipulated." Poirot nodded, his moustache twitching with approval. "Madam, your decision is wise. The manor's past, with its tales of Sir Reginald and Margaret Vane, will live on, but free from the shadows of deception." Mr. Harrow stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "My lady, I'm sorry for my part. My family's served here for generations, and I let fear sway me. I'll do whatever you ask to make it right." Lady Eleanor offered a small smile. "Your loyalty is not in question, Mr. Harrow. You will continue as steward, but with transparency. And Tom," she turned to the groundskeeper, "your tools were misused, but your heart is true. Tend the grounds as always." Old Tom nodded, relief washing over his weathered face. "Aye, my lady. I'll keep the place proper." As the household dispersed to their tasks, Poirot walked the manor's grounds one final time, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path. The chapel, its inscription of tears of vengeance, now a footnote in the solved mystery, stood silent. The lake, where the pendant had been hidden, shimmered under the sun, its secrets exposed. The second portrait of Margaret Vane, now displayed in the library alongside Sir Reginald's, told a story of betrayal redeemed by truth. In the gallery, Poirot paused before the portrait of Sir Reginald, its frame stripped of the hidden tube, its canvas free of crimson streaks. "Mon ami," he murmured, "your tears were a lie, but they have served to reveal the heart of Ravenwood." Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot found Lady Eleanor alone, gazing at the pendant. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "how can I ever repay you? You've given us a chance to heal." "Madam," Poirot replied, bowing slightly, "the payment is in the truth. The human heart, it is swayed by greed and fear, but also by love. You have chosen love for your family and your legacy. That is enough." As the carriage arrived to take him to Ashbourne Hollow Station, Poirot reflected on the case. The chemical mixture, crafted by Beatrice's alchemical knowledge, had fueled the illusion. Charles's debts had driven his complicity, while Mr. Harrow and old Tom, bound by loyalty and coercion, had played their parts. The secret passage, the chapel's riddle, the second portrait, all were props in a drama of manipulation, exploiting the manor's history to sway Lady Eleanor's heart. Yet Poirot's little grey cells had seen through the deception, restoring order. At the station, as the train's whistle sounded, Poirot boarded, his mind already turning to new puzzles. Ravenwood Manor would endure, its Gothic towers a testament to resilience. The mystery of the bleeding portrait had been no curse, but a mirror to human frailty. Greed, desperation, devotion. Poirot smiled faintly, adjusting his hat. "Eh bien," he murmured, "the truth, it is a light that banishes even the darkest shadows." As the train pulled away, Ravenwood Manor receded into the mist, its legacy secured, its secrets laid to rest. Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian detective, turned his gaze forward, ready for the next challenge to his grey cells.